The night was cold, and the alien forest whispered with strange voices. Dark shadows moved between the twisted trees, and glowing eyes blinked in the distance. The ground was wet with mist. Every step made a soft crunch. In the middle of this dark place, a little alien girl sat on the ground, trembling. Her skin was pale, almost shining under the moonlight. Her large eyes were filled with tears, and her tiny hands clutched at her chest. She had been left behind, abandoned by her own people. They whispered she was weak, too small to survive, and a burden no one wanted. She had cried for them, begging not to be left alone, but their backs had turned, their footsteps faded, and only silence answered her. Now she sat under a broken tree, shivering, her stomach empty, and her hope fading. The sounds of growls in the distance grew louder. Closer, sharper, the monsters had caught her scent. These were no simple beasts. Their claws could tear stone, and their teeth shone like blades. They hunted the weak. And tonight, the little girl was their prey. Her breath shook as she tried to make herself small, pressing her body into the roots of the tree. But the forest was alive with hunger. Every growl grew nearer, circling her like shadows closing in. Her tears fell silently, for she knew no one would come for her. Her people had chosen to leave her, and so she would die, alone in the dark. Then footsteps, not the light steps of a beast, not the soft crawl of a predator. These were heavy, steady, strong, echoing across the silence. The girl lifted her head, her wide eyes filled with fear and wonder. From the mist, a figure appeared, tall, broad, carrying something long and sharp across his back. It was a human. He moved with quiet confidence, scanning the trees, his face calm but alert. The monsters had not yet shown themselves, but he could feel them. The air was thick with danger. And then his eyes fell on the girl. She was so small, so fragile, her body shaking under the roots. For a moment, he thought she was already gone. But then her lips moved, a broken whisper escaping. "Help!" she cried, though her voice was weak and strange. The human stopped, his heart pulling in a way he did not expect. He had seen suffering before, war, fire, the cruelty of the galaxy. But something about this child, abandoned and defenseless, struck him deeply. He could walk away, keep himself safe, and no one would ever know. Yet the growls came again, louder this time, surrounding them both. The girl's eyes widened as shadows moved closer. The human placed a hand on his weapon. And in that single breath, he made his choice. He stepped forward. The monsters roared, their shapes breaking through the trees, their eyes burning with hunger. The girl screamed, covering her head with her hands. But instead of leaving, the human stood between her and the beasts. The forest erupted with snarls. The human drew his blade, its steel shining under the pale light. The beasts circled, their fangs dripping with saliva, their claws scratching the ground. The air shook with the sound of their roars. The little alien girl looked up through her tears. She had been sure no one would come, sure that she would be left to die. But here stood a stranger, a human who did not run. His body was tense, his eyes sharp, and his stance unshaken. The first beast lunged. The human swung his blade, sparks flying as steel met claw. The sound cut through the night like thunder. The girl gasped, clutching her chest as blood splattered across the ground. The fight had begun. The beasts snarled and snapped, circling tighter, faster. The human stepped carefully, every move meant to shield the child behind him. She pressed herself against the roots, her heart racing with every strike. The monsters were many, and he was only one. Yet he did not falter. His blade cut, his fists struck. His voice growled with determination. He had chosen. And now there was no turning back. The girl watched with wide eyes, her tears slowly mixing with awe for the first time. She felt a spark of something she thought she had lost, hope. and in the roar of monsters and clash of steel. She whispered again, trembling, "Please, don't leave me." The air was thick with the smell of blood and mist. The human's blade glistened in the pale moonlight, each strike ringing through the forest. The monsters hissed and growled, their yellow eyes burning with hunger. The little alien girl trembled behind the roots of the broken tree, too afraid to move. The human fought fiercely. But he knew the truth. There were too many. Each time he cut one down, another circled closer. Their claws scraped the earth. Their jaws snapped like iron traps. He glanced back once, only for a second. The girl's small face was streaked with tears, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Don't leave me." His heart clenched, harder than any wound he had ever taken. He could run, he could save himself, and no one would ever know. But he stayed. A choice burned inside him: protect her, or abandon her as others had done. His body ached, his arm heavy with the blade, but his will stood strong. He had seen too much cruelty in the galaxy, and he would not add to it tonight. The monsters snarled and lunged again. He pushed one back with a hard kick, the sound of bones snapping echoing through the trees. Another leaped for his throat, but he swung his blade high, cutting it down mid-air. The ground shook as the beast crashed lifeless into the mud. The girl gasped, her small hands clinging tighter to her chest. She had thought humans were only whispers, strange stories told by her people. But this one bled for her, fought for her, stood in front of her like a wall of iron, and her tears now were not only of fear, but of something new, something unknown. The human growled as another claw cut across his shoulder. Warm blood soaked his sleeve, but he gritted his teeth and pressed on. The beasts drew back for a moment, circling, waiting, calculating. He used that breath to kneel down, his eyes locking on the girl. "Stay close," he said, his voice steady but low. She nodded quickly, though her body shook so hard she could barely move. Her language was not his, but something in his tone reached her. For the first time, she felt like she was not alone. The forest grew quiet for a moment. The mist curled around their shapes, and the only sound was her soft breathing. But silence in this forest was never safety. The next attack came faster, deadlier. 3 beasts at once, one from the left, one from the right, and one from the shadows behind him. The human spun, blade flashing, blocking the first, cutting the second. But the third came too fast, its claws reaching for the girl. Her scream tore through the night. The human turned with fury, slamming his shoulder into the beast and driving it into the dirt. The blade pierced its chest, and the growl died in a choking hiss. The girl covered her face, her body shaking with terror. He stood over her, breathing heavy, his chest rising and falling like a storm. The beast circled again, slower now, unsure. They had expected prey, not a fighter. But the human was no ordinary man. He was a wall between life and death. The girl dared to crawl closer, her small fingers tugging at his torn sleeve. Her eyes were wide, glistening with fear, but also something else: trust. "You safe?" she whispered in broken words. The human blinked, surprised she could speak even a fragment of his tongue. His jaw tightened, and he nodded once. "Yes," he answered. Simple, firm, a promise forged in the fire of battle. Her lips trembled, and she held tighter to his sleeve. She did not understand everything, but she understood enough he would not leave her. The growls returned, deeper, heavier. The beasts were gathering again, stronger ones pushing forward, their shadows larger than the trees. The human tightened his grip on his blade, knowing the fight was not over. His body hurt, but his spirit burned brighter with every heartbeat. The girl hid behind him, her tiny frame pressed to his leg. Every step he took, she followed. Every strike he gave, she flinched. but never let go of him. Her trust grew with every moment, as if she had tied her soul to his. The beasts roared as one. A thunderous cry that shook the ground. This was no hunt now. It was war. The human narrowed his eyes, his voice low as he whispered to himself, "Then let it be war." The little girl looked up at him, her tears shining in the moonlight. For the first time since she was left alone, she did not feel abandoned. She did not feel weak. She felt protected. The human raised his blade again. Standing tall despite the blood on his skin, he had made his choice, and he would see it through. One man against the darkness, one child clinging to his side, and together they stepped deeper into the fight. The night howled with monsters, but in the middle of the storm, the bond of two souls began to form. The human's choice had been made, and it would change both their lives forever. The forest was filled with silence after the clash. Only the sound of heavy breathing and the slow drip of blood echoed through the night. The human stood tall, his blade heavy with crimson stains. The little alien girl clung to his side, her tiny fingers gripping his torn sleeve. He had survived the first wave, but his body trembled with exhaustion. A cut ran across his shoulder, and his arm ached with every movement. Still, his eyes never left the darkness between the trees. He knew the beasts were not finished. Not yet. The girl's eyes were wide, shining with fear. She pressed closer against his leg, as if hiding behind his shadow would protect her. Her lips moved, whispering the word again. "Safe," she said, though her voice broke. The human looked down at her, and for a moment his hardened face softened. Safe, he thought, as if such a thing could exist here. But her trust, fragile as glass, had already been placed in him, and he could not let it shatter. The ground shifted. The mist curled thicker around them, and new growls rumbled in the distance. The beasts were regrouping, smarter this time, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The human tightened his grip on the blade. But his mind rasped. He could not keep fighting like this forever. His strength had limits, and every wound slowed him down. If he fell, the girl would be torn apart in seconds. The girl tugged at his sleeve, pointing weakly toward the left. Her small voice whispered in broken words, "Path." There, the human's eyes followed, and indeed, between two crooked trees lay a faint trail. It was narrow, almost hidden. Only someone small could have noticed it. The human realized the girl knew these lands better than he. Perhaps she was not only a burden, perhaps she was the key to survival. He nodded once and lifted her carefully into his arms. Her light weight pressed against his chest. She gasped softly, surprised at his strength. But then her small hands gripped his shirt tightly, afraid to let go. "Hold on," he muttered, his voice low but steady. She did not understand the words. Not fully, but she understood his tone, and she clung tighter. The human began moving down the hidden path, each step quick but careful, avoiding roots and thorns. Behind them, the growls rose again. The monsters had noticed their prey escaping. The girl buried her face into his chest as the forest shook with roars. The human kept his eyes sharp, every sense alive with danger. Branches whipped his arms. Roots clawed at his boots, but he did not stop. He would not stop, not while she was alive in his arms. The path twisted into a narrow ravine. Moonlight barely touched the ground here. The sound of rushing water echoed from deeper within. The human hoped the noise might mask their trail. But hope was fragile. The growls returned. Louder, closer. The beasts were hunting them relentlessly, and soon glowing eyes lit up the shadows behind them. The girl cried out, her voice trembling with fear. The human set her down gently and raised his blade again. "Stay behind me," he commanded. Even if she did not understand the words, she understood his stance. The first beast leaped into the ravine. Its body landed with a sickening thud, claws digging into the stone. Its roar shook the narrow space. Echoing like thunder, the human stepped forward, swinging his blade in a sharp arc. Steel met flesh. The beast shrieked, stumbling back with blood spilling across the rocks. The girl screamed, covering her face, but the human's voice cut through the chaos. "Steady, strong, quiet," he said, his tone like iron. She forced herself to stop, holding her breath. Her heart raced, but something in his voice gave her strength. She lowered her hands and watched him fight. More beasts followed, dropping down into the ravine. The narrow walls trapped them all inside. There would be no escape now, only survival. The human's blade clashed again and again, sparks flying in the dark. His arms ached, his wounds burned, but his spirit refused to break. The girl's wide eyes followed every strike, and slowly, her fear turned to something else. A strange fire burned in her chest. She had been abandoned, left to die, told she was worthless. But here was someone who refused to leave her. Someone who fought until his body bled, just to keep her alive. Tears rolled down her cheeks. But she whispered again, stronger this time, safe. The human heard it, and though he said nothing, his grip tightened on the blade. For her, he would make it true. The battle raged in the ravine. Claws tore the stone. Fangs flashed in the dark. But the human stood his ground. Every strike a promise, every breath a vow. The girl crawled closer to the wall, her hands trembling as she pressed against the stone. Her eyes never left him. She did not know why. But she believed in him. She believed he would not fall. The night stretched on, long and merciless, but in that ravine, something unbreakable was being forged. Not just survival, not just strength, but the bond of a warrior and a child, tied by fate. The first battle was far from over. But the girl no longer felt abandoned. And the human no longer fought only for himself. Together, in blood and darkness, they had become more than strangers. The night had not ended. The fire burned low, its glow flickering against the ravine walls. The human sat still, his back against the stone, his blade resting across his knees. Beside him, the little alien girl slept curled up, her tiny breaths soft and steady. For the first time in many hours, the forest was quiet. But the human knew this silence was not safety. It was only the calm before the next storm. The beasts would not give up their hunt, not while blood lingered in the air. His eyes scanned the shadows, every muscle tense. He had fought many battles before, but this one was different. He was not only fighting for himself, he was fighting for the fragile life that slept against his side. The girl stirred in her sleep, mumbling softly. Her small hand clutched his torn sleeve even in dreams. The words she had learned whispered past her lips again. "Safe," she breathed, as if the word itself kept the darkness away. The human's jaw tightened. Safe was not a promise he could easily give in this cursed forest, but he would fight to make it true. No matter how many monsters came for them. At dawn, the mist began to lift. The first light cut through the trees above, pale and weak. The human rose slowly, careful not to wake her, but the girl's eyes blinked open, wide and tired. She rubbed them with her small fists. Her stomach growled softly. The human handed her the last of the ration without hesitation. She took it quickly, her eyes shining with gratitude. When she finished, she pointed again toward the hidden path. Her voice was small, broken, but certain. "Way out," she said. The human nodded once. Trusting her knowledge, he lifted her onto his back. Her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Her small head rested against his shoulder, and together they began walking deeper into the forest. The air was heavy with tension. Birds did not sing here, and even the wind felt afraid. Every step echoed louder than it should have. And the human's grip tightened on the blade at his side. The girl whispered softly, her words uncertain. "Mon. Stirs. Follow." The human stopped, his eyes narrowing. He had felt a tooth a sense of being hunted. They were not alone. Shapes moved between the trees. Shadows gliding like liquid. The beasts were clever. They did not strike yet. They waited, circling, hurting them. The human quickened his pace. Every sound was sharper now, the snap of a branch, the crunch of leaves. The girl clung tighter to his back, her tiny body trembling. But her eyes stayed open, alert, watching the shadows. The path narrowed into a stretch of tangled roots. The human stepped carefully, but a low growl came from ahead. The beasts had blocked the way. Their glowing eyes appeared one by one. Surrounding the trail, the girl gasped, pointing quickly to the side. "Here, here," she cried, tugging at his shirt. The human turned and saw a narrow gap between the trees. It was small, hidden, almost invisible. But she had noticed it. Without hesitation, he ran toward it. Branches tore at his skin. Roots tried to trip his steps, but he forced his way through. The girl clung to him like a shadow, her breath hot against his neck. Behind them, the beasts roared in fury. Claws scraped against stone, teeth snapped in the air. They had lost their perfect trap. The prey had slipped through. The human pressed on until they reached a small clearing. Here, the sunlight broke through the canopy. The beasts stopped at the edge, snarling but refusing to step forward. The girl's eyes widened, her voice trembling. "Sacred ground," she whispered. The human looked around, unsure of her meaning, but he could feel it too. The air was different, here, still dangerous. But calmer. He set her down gently. Her legs shook, but she stood beside him. She reached for his hand, tiny fingers curling around his rough palm, and for the first time, she did not tremble as much. The human glanced down at her. Her courage was small, fragile, but it burned brighter than fear. He realized she was not only surviving because of him, he was surviving because of her. The girl tugged his hand, pulling him toward the edge of the clearing. "Water." "There," she said, pointing at the faint sound of a stream. Together, they walked carefully, and soon the sound grew stronger, fresh, and alive. They knelt at the water's edge. The girl cupped her hands to drink. Her eyes closing with relief, the human filled his flask. Splashing some on his wounds, the cold sting brought a sharp breath from his lips. The girl touched his arm gently, her eyes full of worry, though she had no words to say it. She tore a strip from her small dress and tried to press it against his cut. The human blinked in surprise, then let her. For a moment, the roles shifted. She was no longer only the one being saved. She was helping him, giving what little she could, and in that act, the fragile bond between them grew stronger. The beasts still lurked beyond the clearing, their eyes burning with hate, but for now, they could not cross. The girl leaned against him, her small voice whispering the only word she truly knew. "Safe." The human looked out at the shadows, waiting for them. He knew the hunt was not over. But now he was certain of one thing. They were no longer just survivor and child. They were becoming a team, and together they would face whatever came next. The ravine was quiet now. The human stood still, his chest rising and falling with every heavy breath. His blade dripped with dark blood, and the stones around him were stained. The last beast lay broken at his feet, its body twitching no more. The little alien girl peeked from the shadow of the rocks. Her wide eyes glistened with both fear and wonder. She had seen death before, seen cruelty from her own people, but never had she seen someone fight for her. Never had she seen someone stay. The human wiped his blade against his torn sleeve. The cut across his shoulder still burned, and his side ached with every movement. But he did not show weakness, not before her. His eyes searched the shadows again, making sure no monster still lingered. When silence finally settled, he turned. To the child, her tiny hands clung to the wall, trembling, her lips parted, trying to form words she did not know. Finally, she whispered again, in her broken voice, "Safe." The human's stern face softened, just a little. He sheathed his blade and crouched down before her. Her small body shivered, her knees scraped from crawling, without a word. He reached into his pack and pulled out a ration. The girl blinked, unsure at first. Her people had given her nothing, not even a chance to live. And now, here was this strange being, offering food. She hesitated, her hands twitching with doubt, but hunger was stronger than fear. Slowly, she reached forward and took the ration. Her eyes flicked up to meet his, uncertain. The human nodded once, firm but kind. She bit into the food, her sharp little teeth breaking it apart quickly. Tears slid down her face as she chewed, not from the taste, but from the feeling that she was no longer forgotten, that someone cared if she lived. The human watched quietly, his expression unreadable, but deep inside, something stirred. He had not planned to save her, had not planned to carry this burden. Yet here she was, fragile and small, already tied to him. The girl finished quickly. Wiping her mouth with her arm, she whispered again, the word she had learned, "Safe." The human exhaled slowly, almost like a sigh. For a long moment, they simply sat in the silence of the ravine. The mist had thinned, and faint moonlight touched the rocks. The monster's growls had faded into the distance. For now, there was peace, fragile and uncertain. The girl crawled a little closer, still keeping her eyes on him. Her hands shook, but she reached out, touching his sleeve. It was torn, soaked with blood. But she held on to it anyway, as if to say, "Please, don't leave." The human looked down at her hand, so small against his arm. He thought of how easily she could have died tonight, how easily he could have walked away, but he had not, and he did not regret it. He reached out carefully, placing a rough hand on her shoulder. She flinched at first, unused to kindness, but when she saw no anger in his eyes, she relaxed. Her body leaned into his touch, fragile but hopeful. "You are not alone," he muttered. Though she could not understand, still, his voice was steady. And the tone was enough. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth sink into her. Her small body relaxed, her breath slowing. The night stretched on. The human built a small fire near the ravine wall, its smoke curling upward. The girl sat beside him, her arms hugging her knees. The flames reflected in her eyes, making them glow softly. She glanced at him again, studying his face. Humans were strange to her, their features hard, their voices deep. But there was strength in him, not the cruel kind her people had shown. This was a strength that protected, a strength that gave. The human shared a small piece of water with her. She drank carefully, as if afraid it might be taken away. When she finished, she whispered once more, "Safe," this time softer, almost like a prayer. The human leaned back against the wall, his eyes closing for a moment. He knew the night was not done. The beasts would return, and more dangers lay beyond this forest. But for now, he let himself rest, just enough to breathe. The girl curled beside him, her small body pressed against his side. Her eyes grew heavy, the fire's warmth lulling her into sleep for the first time since she had been abandoned. She did not fear the dark, because she was not alone anymore. The human stayed awake a little longer. His hand rested near his blade, his ears sharp to every sound. But when he looked down at her peaceful face, he felt a resolve deeper than any battle had ever given him. He had fought for her once. He would fight for her again, no matter how many beasts, no matter how deep the forest. He would not let her be abandoned again. The fire cracked softly. The night stretched silent and in the heart of danger. A fragile bond had been born, one that would only grow stronger with every step forward. The temple lay in silence. The broken stones glowed faintly, their carvings still shimmering with the girl's hidden light. The monsters had fled into the forest, their roars fading into the distance for the first time since the night began. The air no longer stank of death. The human sat on the cold floor, his back pressed against a cracked pillar, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. His blade rested beside him, heavy with blood and battle in his arms. The little alien girl stirred, her breathing shallow but steady, her eyes fluttered. Opened slowly, she blinked up at him, confused, her lips moving without sound. Then, with the last strength she had, she whispered the only word she truly knew. Safe. The human looked down at her, his rough face softening. Yes, he said, firmly, his voice low but certain. Safe, not because of the temple, not because of the glow, but because he would not let the world take her away again. The girl weakly lifted her hand. Her tiny fingers brushed his cheek, leaving faint streaks of blood and dirt. Her eyes filled with tears, not of fear this time, but of something deeper trust. He held her closer, his heartbeat steady against her small frame. The fire of battle still burned in his wounds, but his spirit felt lighter. He had fought countless fights before, but this one was different. This time, he had not only survived, he had saved. The temple stood quiet around them. Morning light broke through the canopy above, washing the ruins in gold. The girl's pale skin glowed softly under the sun, her hair tangled but shining. She looked fragile, yet somehow stronger than before. The human helped her sit. She swayed, her small body weak, but her eyes were bright. She pointed toward the horizon, past the broken gates of the temple. Home. Not there, she whispered, shaking her head. Her voice cracked with the weight of memory. Her people had abandoned her, left her to the beasts. That place was no longer home. She had no place to return to. The human understood without words. He rose slowly, lifting her once more into his arms. Her weight was nothing compared to the battles he had fought, but her presence was heavier than any burden he had carried before. She rested her head on his shoulder. Her small voice whispered again, softer this time, family. The word trembled from her lips, but it was clear. The human froze for a moment. His heart tightened in his chest. He had not expected this, not from a child who had lost everything. Yet her word echoed in him like truth. He nodded once, holding her closer. Yes, he murmured, his voice steady as stone. Family, not by blood, not by race, but by choice. Together, they stepped out of the ruins. The sun was brighter now, the forest alive with light, but danger still lurked in the shadows. The beasts were gone. Yet the world was still cruel. The human's grip on his blade tightened. He would carry it always, not for himself now, but for her. The little one who clung to him as if he were her whole world. The girl's tears dried as she looked around. The forest no longer seemed as terrifying. Because she was not walking it alone, every step he took was a promise he would never abandon her. The path stretched ahead, long and uncertain, but they did not fear it. The girl's hand slipped into his, tiny against his calloused palm. Their bond was stronger than stone, stronger than fear. Birds began to sing overhead. The forest that once felt cursed now breathed with life. The girl's lips curved into the faintest smile. Her first smile since the night of her abandonment. The human glanced at her for the first time. He saw not just a frightened child, but someone who had survived. Someone who had found strength in the darkest night. They walked on, their shadows stretching long in the morning sun. Behind them, the The temple grew smaller, fading into the trees. Ahead, the unknown awaited. But they were not afraid. The girl whispered one last time, her voice steady, safe. "Family." The human's lips pressed into a rare smile. "Yes," he answered, his voice carrying into the bright morning. Together, they left the forest behind, not as strangers, not as prey and protector, but as something more, a human and an alien child bound forever by choice and survival. And in that bond, a new beginning was born. The clearing gave them only a short rest. The beasts circled at the edges, their glowing eyes never leaving. They hissed and growled, their hunger rising with every passing moment. The human knew this safety would not last. He tightened his grip on the little girl's hand, her small fingers curled into his, trusting him completely. She whispered the word again, trembling, "Safe." But he could not lie to her. They were far from safe. The beasts would wait until hunger overcame fear, and then they would strike together. Stronger than before, the human's sharp eyes searched. The tree line there had to be a way out, some path, some chance. The girl tugged at his sleeve and pointed toward the west temple. She whispered, her voice fragile but certain. He followed her gaze through the trees. He saw faint stone pillars rising from the ground, ruins, old and broken, swallowed by vines and moss, but they were walls, walls that could give them a chance. He nodded once and lifted her onto his back, her arms wrapped tight around his neck, her breath quick against his skin. With swift steps, he ran. The beasts roared as they realized their prey was slipping away again. The forest shook with pursuit. Claws scraped against stone. Branches snapped under heavy bodies. The human's lungs burned as he carried her. But he did not stop. The temple grew closer with every desperate stride. At last, they burst through the broken gates. Ancient stones loomed around them, cracked and leaning. Strange carvings glowed faintly in the moonlight. The girl's eyes widened, fear and awe mixing in. Her face, she whispered something in her language, words he did not know. But her trembling voice made him understand this place was sacred. Still, the beasts did not care. They poured into the ruins, their roars shaking the pillars. The human set the girl down gently. "Stay behind the stones," he commanded, his voice firm. She did not understand all the words, but she knew his tone, and she obeyed. The monsters closed in, shadows filling the temple floor. The human raised his blade, his stance firm despite the blood on his body. This was at the fight he could not escape. The last stand, the first beast lunged, its claws flashing. The human met it head on, his blade cutting deep. Blood sprayed across the broken stones. The girl gasped, clutching her chest. Another came from the side, jaws snapping for his arm. He twisted, slamming his shoulder into the beast and driving his blade through its chest. The body fell heavy, shaking the ground, but more poured in. Unstoppable, the human's breath grew harsh. His wounds reopened, blood running down his side. Still, his eyes burned with fire. He would not fall, not while she lived. The girl pressed against the stone pillar, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs would not move. All she could do was watch as the human fought alone. Each strike louder, each roar closer. The beasts were too many. They surrounded him, their claws cutting his arms, his back. His body faltered for a moment, and the girl's heart stopped. "Safe," she cried out, her voice breaking in desperation. Her small voice cut through the chaos. The human's head lifted at the sound. Her trust gave him strength. With a roar of his own, he struck harder, faster. His blade became an unyielding wall. Beasts fell one by one, but still they came, still they circled. The girl's tears blurred her vision, but something inside her stirred. A warmth, deep and ancient, pulsed in her chest. Her small hands began to glow. She looked down in shock as faint light shone from her skin. Her bloodline forgotten by her people, hidden within her, was awakening. The temple's carvings responded, glowing brighter as her power stirred. The monsters hissed, stepping back in fear. The human saw the glow from the corner of his eye. He did not understand it, but he felt the shift. The air itself changed. The girl was no longer just a helpless child. She stepped forward, her small voice trembling but strong. "Stop," she whispered. The light burst from her hands, washing over the stones. The beasts shrieked, their bodies twisting under the sacred glow. They stumbled back, howling in fury. The temple shook with the force, and for the first time, the humans saw them retreat. Not because of his blade, but because of her. The girl fell to her knees, the light fading. Her body shook with weakness. Her strength gone, the human rushed to her, catching her before she collapsed. Her eyes fluttered open, looking up at him. "Safe," she whispered again, her voice barely a breath. He held her close, his jaw tight, his heart steady. "Yes," he answered softly. And this time, he truly meant it. The beasts roared from the edges of the ruins. But none dared to cross the glowing carvings. The temple had become their shield, and the girl's power had saved them both. The human sat with her in his arms, his body battered, his spirit burning. He had stood against the darkness, but she had turned it back. Together, they had survived the last stand, and together, they would face whatever came after.